deep within the spiraling arms of the galaxy, where space itself bent under the weight of ancient technologies. The Caltharian research vessel Kronos Drift moved through streams of time like a ghost through memories. The ship's crystalline hull caught starlight from a dozen different eras, refracting it into impossible colors that painted the temporal currents in shades of yesterday and tomorrow.vo. Arth pressed his four-fingered hand against the observation deck's viewing portal, watching. Reality blur passed in layers of causality. His silver eyes evolved to perceive temporal distortions that would blind lesser species, track the flow of centuries like others might watch clouds drift across the sky. For 300 standard cycles, he had served as lead temporal archaeologist for the Caltharian Institute, documenting the birth and death of worlds across their corner of the universe. "Another routine survey," muttered Kren from his position at the biological analysis console. The xenobiologist's tentacles danced across. Holographic displays showing probability matrices for planetary development. System designation Terransol, third planet, early formation phase. The parameters suggest standard rocky world evolution, possibly habitable within 2 billion cycles. Vorth nodded absently, his attention focused on the temporal resonance readings flowing across his neural interface. The Caltharians had perfected time travel not for conquest or personal gain, but for knowledge. They were the galaxy's historians, the keepers of cosmic memory, dedicated to understanding how worlds lived and died. Their temporal observation posts had documented thousands of planetary births, each one following predictable patterns of formation, evolution, and eventual decline. "There's something unusual about the temporal signature," reported Hesse from her position at the archaeological sensors. The anthropologist's scaled features showed concentration as she refined the readings. "The quantum fluctuations around this system are more complex than standard stellar formation models predict." Zeth looked up from his military analysis station, where he tracked the violent processes that shaped young worlds. The warrior scholar's scarred carapace bore marks from battles fought across time itself, defending Caltharian research missions from temporal predators and paradox storms. "Complex how? Are we looking at artificial intervention? Some other civilization's terraforming project?" "Negative," Hesse replied, her voice carrying the careful precision of a researcher who had learned not to jump to conclusions. "The patterns are natural, but they're more intricate than anything in our databases. It's as if this system is generating complexity at rates that shouldn't be possible under normal physical laws." Vorth moved away from the viewing portal and approached the central command nexus, where streams of data from across time and space converged into comprehensible patterns. The Kronos Drift's quantum processors could analyze millions of years of planetary development in moments, identifying key evolutionary markers and probable outcomes. But the readings from this particular system defied easy categorization. "Show me the preliminary analysis," he commanded, and the Nexus responded by projecting a three-dimensional model of the target system. A young yellow star burned at the center, surrounded by the debris and forming planets of a stellar system barely 4 billion years old. The third planet hung in the display like a molten jewel, its surface still cooling from the cosmic collision that had formed its unusually large moon. "Initial scans show promising conditions for biological development," Kren reported, manipulating the display to highlight atmospheric composition and temperature gradients. "Water vapor is condensing into primitive oceans. The magnetic field is stabilizing, and the chemical foundations for organic chemistry are forming rapidly. Standard progression for a Class M world." But Vorth's experienced eyes caught details that seemed slightly off from the norm. The planet's rotation was unusually stable despite its recent traumatic formation. The moon's gravitational influence was creating tidal effects that would accelerate oceanic mixing. The atmospheric composition showed trace elements that suggested unusually active geological processes. "There's more," Hesse added, calling up deep time projections. "Our predictive models are having difficulty establishing clear probability curves for this world's development. Normally, we can forecast biological emergence within acceptable parameters, but this system is generating too many variables. Vorth studied the projections with growing interest. In his centuries of temporal archaeology, he had learned to recognize when the universe was preparing something unusual. The signs were subtle, quantum fluctuations that fell just outside normal parameters, probability cascades that suggested multiple unlikely events converging, temporal resonances that hinted at future significance rippling backward through time. I recommend we establish a full temporal observation post, he decided, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. This world may be routine, but the complexity suggests it could provide valuable data about planetary formation under unusual conditions. The team began preparations for extended temporal observation, their crystalline ship adjusting its position in the time stream to establish a stable viewing perspective. The Caltharians had developed temporal archaeology as a precise science, using carefully calibrated observation points to watch history unfold without interfering with causality. They were ghosts in time, witnessing but never touching, recording but never changing. Temporal anchor established, reported Kren, his console showing the complex calculations required to maintain a stable observation point across billions of years. We're locked onto the planet's formation period with full sensory coverage. We can observe its entire developmental history from this position. Begin standard documentation protocols, Vorth ordered, settling into his command position as the ship's systems engaged for long-term observation. Geological formation, atmospheric development, chemical evolution, and biological emergence markers. Full spectrum analysis across all temporal phases. The Chronos drift settled into its timeless vigil, its sensors focused on the small blue-white world spinning through the void 4 billion years in the past. To the Caltharians, it seemed like just another assignment, another world to catalog in their vast databases of cosmic history. They expected to document standard planetary evolution, perhaps with some interesting variations due to the unusual complexity they had detected. None of them suspected they were about to witness the birth of something that would change their understanding of what life could become when it refused to accept limitations. The small planet below continued its ancient dance around its star, innocent of the observers watching from beyond time, unaware that it was destined to become the birthplace of the most remarkable species the galaxy had ever seen. The observation began, and with it, the Caltharians' journey toward a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about life in the universe. Time flowed like honey around the Chronos drift as billions of years compressed into manageable observation periods. Vorth watched the third planet's violent birth unfold through accelerated temporal viewing, its surface gradually cooling from the cosmic impact that had torn away enough material to form its companion moon. Steam rose from cooling oceans as the world settled into the rhythms that would define its future. Everything appeared normal at first. The planet followed predictable patterns of geological development, its crust solidifying into continental masses while primitive atmospheric chemistry began the slow dance toward complexity. Kren monitored biological probability matrices, watching for the spark of organic chemistry that would eventually lead to life. Initial amino acid formation detected, the xenobiologist reported, his tentacles dancing across displays that showed molecular activity in the planet's early oceans. Standard protein synthesis patterns emerging in thermal vent regions. The chemical foundations are progressing within normal parameters. But then the impossible happened. Life didn't emerge gradually from the primordial soup as every biological model predicted. Instead, it exploded into existence with a ferocity that made the ship's analysis system stutter in confusion. Single-celled organisms appeared and immediately began consuming everything around them, adapting to environmental changes faster than the Caltharians' instruments could track. "This can't be right," Kren muttered, recalibrating his sensors repeatedly as the data streams showed impossible readings. These microorganisms are exhibiting adaptation rates that exceed theoretical maximums. They're not just surviving environmental changes, they're thriving on them. Hessa leaned over her colleague's shoulder, studying the biological activity with growing amazement. "Look at the diversity patterns. Instead of filling specific ecological niches, these life forms are creating new ones. They're not adapting to their environment so much as they're reshaping it to suit their needs. The planet's early atmosphere began changing at unprecedented rates as the primitive life forms processed carbon dioxide, released oxygen, and somehow managed to maintain chemical balance despite their aggressive expansion. What should have been a gradual process taking hundreds of millions of years was happening in mere millions. Run the data through historical comparison matrices, Vorth ordered, his voice tight with concern. In 3 centuries of temporal archaeology, he had never seen biological development that deviated so dramatically from established patterns. Cross-reference with every documented case of early planetary biogenesis? The ship's quantum processors worked for several minutes before displaying their results. No match found in any database. The closest parallels came from worlds that had been artificially seeded by advanced civilizations, but temporal scans showed no evidence of outside interference. This planet was generating its biological complexity entirely through natural processes that somehow exceeded natural limits. The metabolic rates are impossible, Kren continued, his scientific training warring with the evidence before his eyes. These organisms are processing energy at rates that should burn through available resources within decades, but instead they keep finding new sources. They're turning volcanic sulfur into food, extracting energy from mineral deposits, even learning to harness radiation from space. Zeth studied the data from his military perspective, recognizing patterns that his colleagues might miss. They're not just surviving, he observed grimly. They're preparing for war. Every adaptation seems designed to resist extinction, to fight against anything that threatens their existence. As if to prove his point, the planet's geological activity intensified dramatically. Massive volcanic eruptions that should have sterilized entire regions instead became nurseries for new forms of life that thrived on extreme heat and toxic gases. Ice ages that flash froze the oceans only encouraged the evolution of organisms that could survive in solid ice, emerging stronger when conditions improved. Asteroid impact detected, Hessa announced as her sensors tracked a massive space rock heading for collision with the planet. Class 7 extinction event incoming. This should reset the biological development to near-zero levels. The Caltharians watched as the asteroid struck with devastating force, its impact creating a crater visible from space and throwing enough debris into the atmosphere to block sunlight for years. By every measure they understood, the planet's life should have been reduced to a few hardy microorganisms hiding in deep ocean vents. Instead, the opposite happened. The impact somehow accelerated evolutionary development as surviving organisms faced new challenges and responded with creative solutions that defied explanation. Some developed the ability to photosynthesize using trace amounts of filtered sunlight. Others learned to feed on the minerals thrown up by the impact. Most remarkably, many began forming cooperative relationships with different species, sharing resources and developing primitive communication methods. They're learning, Vorth whispered, his silver eyes wide with disbelief. Not just adapting or evolving. These organisms are actually learning from each extinction event and preparing for the next one. The planet's surface became a laboratory of biological innovation as life forms experimented with every possible survival strategy. Multicellular organisms appeared ahead of schedule, developing complex structures and specialized functions with remarkable speed. Simple ecosystems grew into intricate webs of interdependence that somehow remained stable despite constant environmental chaos. The mathematical models are breaking down, Kren reported, his voice filled with scientific frustration. These life forms are violating several fundamental principles of evolutionary biology. They're developing beneficial mutations faster than harmful ones can accumulate. They're sharing genetic information across species barriers. They're even exhibiting what appears to be collective memory of past extinction events. Another ice age gripped the planet, and the Caltharians expected to see massive day-offs as temperatures plummeted far below the survival threshold of most life forms. Instead, they watched organisms develop antifreeze proteins, learn to hibernate for centuries, and even create primitive forms of social cooperation to share body heat and resources. They're not just surviving these catastrophes, Hesse observed, with growing wonder. They're using them as opportunities to become stronger. Each extinction event is like a test that weeds out the weak and encourages the strong to become more adaptable. Vorth found himself leaning forward in his command chair, completely absorbed by the unfolding drama below. In all his years of temporal archaeology, he had never seen a world that seemed so determined to support life against impossible odds. Most planets that experienced such frequent catastrophes became dead rocks within their first billion years. This one seemed to treat each disaster as a chance to prove how tenacious life could be. "Continue observation," he ordered, knowing that his team was witnessing something unprecedented. "Document everything, whatever this planet is creating. It's unlike anything in our databases." The primitive oceans teemed with increasingly complex organisms as the world entered its second billion years of existence. Schools of early fish-like creatures moved in patterns that suggested rudimentary intelligence. Plant-like organisms began colonizing landmasses with remarkable speed. The atmosphere continued changing as life and environment shaped each other in an endless dance of adaptation and innovation. "Sir," Zeth said quietly, his warrior's instincts picking up something his colleagues might miss, "I'm detecting patterns that suggest these life forms aren't just random evolutionary experiments. There's a purposefulness to their development, as if they're preparing for something specific." Vorth nodded, sharing his subordinate's unease. The planet below was becoming something extraordinary, but extraordinary in ways that challenged everything the Caltharians thought they knew about how life developed in the universe. They were witnessing the birth of something that wouldn't just inhabit its world, but would eventually reach beyond it to touch the stars themselves. The observation deck of the Kronos Drift hummed with tension as the temporal archaeologists watched their subject planet enter what their databases classified as the age of great reptiles. Massive creatures now dominated every ecological niche, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountain peaks. The dinosaurs had arrived, and with them came a level of biological magnificence that left even the experienced Caltharian speechless. Kren's tentacles trembled as he adjusted his biological sensors to track the enormous predators stalking across the planet's surface. "The scale of these organisms exceeds anything in our comparative databases," he reported, his voice filled with scientific awe. "Some of these creatures mass over 50 tons and demonstrate hunting intelligence that rivals many spacefaring species." Through the temporal viewing portal, Vorth watched a pack of feathered hunters coordinate their attack on a herbivore the size of a Caltharian city transport. The predators moved with precision and planning, using terrain advantages and group tactics that spoke of remarkable intelligence. When they brought down their prey, they shared the feast according to what appeared to be established social hierarchies. "They're not just animals," Hesse observed, studying behavioral patterns through her anthropological sensors. "These creatures are developing primitive cultures. Look at the way different species interact, the territorial boundaries they respect, the communication methods they've developed." The planet had become a showcase of biological engineering that challenged every assumption about evolutionary limits. Flying reptiles with wingspans that dwarfed Caltharian aircraft soared through skies filled with creatures that had independently developed powered flight multiple times. Ocean-dwelling monsters the size of starships ruled marine ecosystems with intelligence and social complexity that rivaled galactic civilizations. "The energy requirements alone should make these life forms impossible," Kren muttered, running calculations that continued to defy logic. "Creatures this large should collapse under their own weight, yet they move with grace and efficiency that suggests their biology operates on principles we don't understand." Zeth studied the apex predators from his military perspective, recognizing strategic thinking that impressed even his warrior's sensibilities. "They're not just hunters," he noted grimly. "They're territorial commanders. Watch how they patrol their domains, how they respond to challenges, how they coordinate with allies and eliminate rivals." These creatures are conducting warfare at a level that many sentient species never achieve. The planet's ecosystems had become intricate webs of cooperation and competition that somehow maintained perfect balance despite the presence of creatures capable of devastating entire continents. Herbivores developed armor and defensive strategies that turned them into living fortresses. Predators responded with increased cunning and pack coordination. The result was an arms race that pushed biological development to extremes that shouldn't have been sustainable. Another extinction event approaching, HFY announced, tracking the massive asteroid that would end the dinosaur age. This impact will be significantly larger than previous events. Class 12 extinction coefficient. Nothing this large should be able to survive. The Caltharians watched with fascination and dread as the cosmic projectile approached their subject world. The impact would release energy equivalent to millions of nuclear weapons, throwing enough debris into the atmosphere to block sunlight for years. By every model in their databases, this event would reduce the planet's magnificent life forms to scattered populations of small scavengers hiding in caves and deep ocean trenches. The asteroid struck with apocalyptic force, its impact visible as a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the system's star. Shockwaves circled the globe multiple times, triggering volcanic eruptions and seismic activity that reshaped entire continents. The sky darkened as billions of tons of debris created a nuclear winter that should have lasted decades. Total biosphere collapse predicted, Kren reported, his instruments showing environmental conditions that had never supported complex life on any documented world. Surface temperatures dropping below survival thresholds for all large organisms. Photosynthesis impossible under current atmospheric conditions. This should mark the end of complex biological development. But once again, the impossible planet defied expectations. As the dust began to settle and weak sunlight filtered through the devastated atmosphere, life emerged from the ruins with renewed determination. Small mammals that had lived in the shadows of the great reptiles suddenly found themselves inheritors of an empty world, and they responded with explosive diversification that put even the dinosaurs' evolutionary speed to shame. The adaptation rates are accelerating, HFY observed with growing amazement. These mammals aren't just filling vacant ecological niches, they're creating entirely new ones. Some are developing powered flight, others are returning to aquatic environments, and many are exhibiting problem-solving abilities that suggest advanced cognitive development. Vorth leaned forward in his command chair, completely absorbed by the unfolding drama. The mammals were small compared to the giants they replaced, but they demonstrated intelligence and adaptability that the dinosaurs had never achieved. They used tools, developed complex social structures, and most remarkably, they began modifying their environment to suit their needs rather than simply adapting to existing conditions. Look at the primate development, Kren reported, focusing his sensors on a group of early ape-like creatures in the planet's tropical forests. These organisms are exhibiting behaviors that exceed our classification systems for animal intelligence. They're making tools, teaching skills to their offspring, and demonstrating abstract thinking capabilities. The primates fascinated the Caltharian observers because they seemed to embody everything that made this planet unique. They weren't the largest or strongest creatures in their environment, but they compensated through intelligence, cooperation, and an apparently unlimited capacity for learning. When faced with challenges, they didn't just adapt to overcome them. They found ways to eliminate the challenges entirely. Early hominid species detected, HFY announced, her instruments tracking the emergence of creatures that walked upright and showed signs of language development. Cranial capacity suggests intelligence levels approaching sentience thresholds. Tool use is becoming increasingly sophisticated. The early humans that emerged from Africa captivated the temporal archaeologists with their combination of physical limitations and mental capabilities. They lacked the natural weapons, armor, or environmental advantages that had made other species successful, but they possessed something far more dangerous, the ability to think their way out of any problem. They're making fire, Zeth observed, his military training helping him recognize the tactical significance of controlled combustion. Not just using it when they find it, but creating it deliberately and using it as both tool and weapon. Number other species on this planet has ever achieved such direct environmental manipulation. The humans spread across their world with remarkable speed, adapting to climates and environments that should have been impossible for their tropical ancestry. They developed clothing from animal skins, created shelters from available materials, and most significantly, they began working together in groups that exceeded their biological kinship connections. They're forming alliances based on shared ideas rather than genetic relationships, Hesse noted, studying the developing human social structures. These creatures are creating artificial family groups, trading relationships, and mutual defense. Packs that span across genetic lines. They're building civilization. But it was when the first human looked up at the night sky with clear recognition and wonder that the Caltharian team realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The creature stood silhouetted against firelight, gazing at the stars. With an expression that transcended mere curiosity, in that moment intelligence met infinity, and the universe gained its first inhabitants who would refuse to be contained by the world of their birth. "They know," Vorth whispered, his silver eyes reflecting the awe he felt. "Somehow they understand that there's more beyond their world. They're already dreaming of reaching the stars." The temporal archaeologists continued their observation, now fully aware that they were documenting the emergence of something that would reshape their understanding of what life could become when it combined intelligence with the same relentless determination that had characterized this remarkable planet since its birth. Reality seemed to blur around the Chronos drift as the temporal archaeologists watched human civilization unfold at a pace that defied everything they knew about species development. What had taken the Caltharians millions of years to achieve, these strange bipedal creatures were accomplishing in mere thousands. Hesse's scaled features showed confusion and wonder as she tracked the rapid changes sweeping across the planet's surface. "The development curve is impossible," she muttered, adjusting her anthropological sensors for the dozenth time that cycle. These humans went from simple hunter-gatherers to agricultural civilization in less than 10,000 years. Our own species took 50 times longer to make the same transition. Through the observation portal, Vorth watched cities rise from nothing as humans learned to work stone, bronze, and iron with remarkable speed. But what amazed him most wasn't their technological progress, it was their response to failure. Every civilization that collapsed seemed to teach the survivors lessons that made the next one stronger, more resilient, more capable of handling the challenges that had destroyed their predecessors. "They don't just build civilizations," he observed, his voice filled with growing awe. "They build them repeatedly, learning from each collapse. Most species that experience civilizational failure never recover. These humans treat it as education." Kren's tentacles danced nervously across his biological analysis console as he struggled to make sense of the data streams. "Their cognitive development exceeds every model in our databases. Individual humans are demonstrating problem-solving abilities that rival our greatest scientists, and they're sharing knowledge across their entire species at rates that should be impossible without technological enhancement." The planet's surface became a patchwork of competing civilizations, each one experimenting with different approaches to social organization, technology, and environmental management. The Caltharians watched empires rise, flourish, and fall only to see new ones emerge from the ashes with improved methods and greater capabilities. "They're not just learning from their own mistakes," Hesse noted, studying the complex patterns of cultural exchange. "They're learning from each other's mistakes." Ideas spread across their entire species faster than most information travels within our own civilization. Zeth focused his military analysis systems on human warfare, and what he discovered disturbed him more than any weapon he had encountered in centuries of temporal archaeology. "They don't fight just for resources or territory," he reported grimly. "They fight for concepts that exist only in their minds. They create weapons of mass destruction for ideas, beliefs, and principles that have no physical reality. The humans had developed metallurgy, mathematics, writing, and engineering with breathtaking speed, but they had also weaponized everything they touched. They turned farming tools into weapons, scientific discoveries into military advantages, and even their own creativity into instruments of war. Yet somehow, they managed to step back from total self-destruction repeatedly, learning restraint just when it seemed they would annihilate themselves entirely. The nuclear weapons should have ended them, Szeth continued, his warriors understanding of destruction making him appreciate the significance of what he was observing. They developed the capability to sterilize their entire planet, used it twice to demonstrate its power, then somehow found the wisdom to avoid using it again. No other species in our databases has ever shown such restraint with ultimate weapons. The breakthrough moment came when the first human-made object left the planet's atmosphere. The Caltharians watched in stunned silence as these recently evolved primates, who had only learned to fly within the past century, launched primitive rockets toward the stars with the same determination their ancestors had shown when facing extinction-level events. "This is unprecedented," Vorth whispered, his silver eyes wide with disbelief. "From their first powered flight to orbital spaceflight in less than 70 years. Our species required over 1,000 years to make the same technological leap. The humans didn't just reach space, they conquered it with typical human persistence. They built space stations, landed on their moon, and sent robotic explorers to other worlds in their system. Each achievement seemed to inspire greater ambitions, as if success only made them hungrier for more challenges to overcome. They're already planning interstellar missions," Kren reported, his biological sensors detecting the electromagnetic signatures of human communication networks discussing faster-than-light travel theories. "They've been a spacefaring species for less than a century, and they're already designing methods to reach other star systems." Hessa studied the social implications of human space exploration with growing amazement. "They're not just reaching for the stars as individuals," she observed. "Their entire species is committing to expansion beyond their homeworld. They're talking about terraforming other planets, establishing colonies, and spreading human civilization across the galaxy." The temporal archaeologists realized they were witnessing something that challenged their fundamental understanding of how intelligent species developed. The humans weren't following the careful, methodical progression that had characterized every other civilization in their databases. Instead, they were bootstrapping themselves upward at an exponential rate that seemed to accelerate with each generation. "Look at their information processing capabilities," Kren added, highlighting the development of human computing technology. "They've created artificial thinking machines that exceed their own cognitive abilities in specific areas. But instead of being replaced by their creations, they're using them to enhance their own intelligence. They're becoming more than they were naturally designed to be." The planet's surface sparkled with city lights as human civilization reached levels of complexity that had taken the Caltharians eons to achieve. But more importantly, the humans were beginning to look beyond their world with serious intent, making concrete plans to carry their species to other stars and establish new homes among the cosmos. "They're going to succeed," Vorth realized, his voice filled with certainty that surprised even himself. "Not just at reaching space, but at spreading across the galaxy. Everything about their development suggests they're preparing for interstellar expansion on a scale that will dwarf any previous civilization." Szeth studied the military implications of human expansion with professional interest and growing respect. "They've learned to cooperate on a planetary scale when facing external challenges," he noted. "Their wars are becoming smaller and less frequent as they focus on shared goals that benefit their entire species. They're transitioning from competing tribes to a unified force preparing to claim the galaxy." The observation data showed human technology advancing at rates that continued to accelerate, their scientific understanding expanding exponentially, and their species-wide commitment to space exploration growing stronger with each passing year. The Caltharians found themselves witnessing not just the development of another intelligent species, but the birth of something that would fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. "Continue observation," Vorth ordered, though his voice carried a tone of reverence that had been absent when they first arrived at this system. "We need to document everything. Whatever these humans become, they're going to reshape our understanding of what's possible for intelligent life in the universe." The small blue world continued its ancient orbit around its yellow star, but now it carried inhabitants who had already begun reaching beyond the boundaries of their birth world, driven by the same relentless determination that had characterized life on this remarkable planet since its violent beginning. The quantum processors aboard the Kronos Drift worked frantically to keep pace with the accelerating timeline as human civilization exploded beyond the boundaries of their homeworld. Vorth watched through the temporal observation portal as the third planet of the Terran system became the center of an expanding sphere of influence that grew larger and more complex with each passing decade. "They're not just colonizing other worlds," Hessa reported, her anthropological sensors tracking human expansion across multiple star systems. "They're transforming them. Every planet they touch becomes more habitable, more productive, more capable of supporting not just human life, but all the life forms they bring with them." The humans had developed faster than light travel with characteristic speed and ingenuity. But what amazed the Caltharian observers was how they used this capability. Instead of simply exploiting resources or establishing military outposts like most spacefaring species, they approached each new world as an opportunity to create something better than what they had left behind. "Their terraforming methods exceed our theoretical models," Kren observed, his tentacles dancing across displays that showed impossible atmospheric engineering projects. "They're not just making planets habitable for their own biology. They're creating ecosystems that support multiple species simultaneously, including ones that couldn't naturally coexist." Through accelerated temporal viewing, the archaeologists watched human colonies spread across the galaxy like seeds from an impossibly fertile tree. Each new world became a laboratory for innovation, where humans experimented with new forms of agriculture, architecture, and social organization. But more remarkably, they began encountering other intelligent species and responding in ways that defied every precedent in galactic history. "First contact protocols detected," Zeth announced, his military sensors tracking human encounters with alien civilizations. "But they're not following standard patterns of conquest, subordination, or defensive isolation. They're attempting communication and cooperation with species that are fundamentally different from themselves." Vorth leaned forward in his command chair, watching as humans made contact with crystalline entities that communicated through harmonic resonance, gaseous intelligences that existed in the upper atmospheres of gas giants, and machine civilizations that had evolved beyond biological origins. In each case, the humans approached these aliens not as threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited, but as potential partners in projects that could benefit all involved parties. "They're sharing technology," Hessa noted with amazement. "Not just trading it or selling it, but actively teaching other species how to improve their own capabilities. They're treating every alien encounter as an opportunity for mutual advancement." The galactic community began changing as human influence spread. But the change wasn't the typical pattern of conquest and absorption that marked most expansionist civilizations. Instead, the humans seemed to inspire other species to exceed their own limitations, to reach for achievements they had never considered possible. The Velthic Dominion just established their first interstellar colony, Kren reported, tracking species that had been content with single-world existence for millions of years. "They're using human terraforming techniques to establish agricultural settlements in previously uninhabitable systems. The humans taught them methods that our databases show took us centuries to develop." Zeth studied the military implications of human expansion with growing respect and unease. "They're not building an empire in any traditional sense," he observed. "They're creating a coalition of allied species that voluntarily cooperate because human methods produce better results than conquest or isolation." They're making themselves indispensable through competence and reliability. The temporal observation revealed something even more remarkable as the centuries passed. Human colonies didn't just survive and thrive, they became centers of innovation that attracted other species seeking to learn from human methods. Mixed species settlements emerged where humans, aliens, and hybrid intelligences worked together on projects that none could have accomplished alone. They're changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization, Vorth realized, his voice filled with awe. Instead of competing for resources and territory, species are beginning to cooperate on projects that expand the capabilities of everyone involved. The humans are teaching the galaxy that cooperation produces better results than competition. But the most stunning revelation came when Hessa made a discovery that would change everything the Caltharians thought they knew about their own history. "Sir, I'm detecting temporal resonance patterns in the human expansion data," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "The quantum signatures match elements of our own technological development, but the timeline is impossible. These patterns suggest our temporal archaeology methods were influenced by human innovations that won't be developed for another 1,000 years. Vorth's silver eyes widened as he processed the implications. "Run a deep time analysis on our own technological history," he ordered, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they might discover. "Cross-reference our temporal manipulation capabilities with the projected development of human science." The ship's quantum processors worked for several minutes before displaying results that challenged everything the Caltharians believed about their own past. Their temporal archaeology technology, the foundation of their entire civilization's scientific advancement, showed quantum signatures that could only have originated from human innovations that existed far in their future. "It's impossible," Kren whispered, but his instruments confirmed the analysis. "Our ability to observe the past was somehow influenced by human developments that haven't happened yet. We've been using technology that exists because of species we're currently observing." Zeth studied the temporal mechanics with a warrior's appreciation for strategic implications. "It's not impossible," he corrected grimly. "It's inevitable. The humans aren't just going to influence galactic civilization in their future. They've already influenced it in ways that reach backward through time to affect our own development." The revelation struck the temporal archaeologists like a physical blow. They hadn't just been observing the rise of another species. They had been witnessing the emergence of the civilization that would eventually teach the galaxy what it meant to transcend limitations. The humans weren't simply another entry in their databases of intelligent life. They were the template for what intelligent life could become when it refused to accept the word impossible. "The temporal causality loop is stable," Hessa reported, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "Human innovations in our far future somehow influenced our own past development, creating the conditions that allowed us to observe their rise in the first place. We've been part of their story since before they existed." Vorth stood slowly from his command chair, his legs unsteady as he processed the magnitude of their discovery. For centuries, the Caltharians had prided themselves on being the galaxy's premier temporal archaeologists, the keepers of cosmic history, the observers who documented the rise and fall of civilizations across time and space. Now they realized they had been students all along, learning from teachers who existed in a future they were only beginning to understand. "The complexity patterns we detected at the beginning," he said quietly, his silver eyes reflecting a new understanding. "The unusual quantum signatures that brought us to this system in the first place. They weren't random anomalies. They were echoes of what these humans would become, rippling backward through time to ensure we would be here to witness their emergence." Kren's tentacles trembled as he studied the biological data that had seemed impossible when they first arrived. Every adaptation rate that exceeded our models, every evolutionary leap that defied explanation, every survival strategy that shouldn't have worked. It all makes sense now. This planet wasn't just generating complex life through natural processes. It was being guided by the future influence of what that life would eventually become. The observation data showed human civilization continuing its exponential expansion across the galaxy. But now the Caltharians understood. They were witnessing something far more significant than territorial conquest or technological advancement. They were observing the birth of a species that would eventually transcend the normal limitations of space and time, reaching backward through causality itself to ensure their own existence. "They're not just spreading across the galaxy," Zeth observed, his military analysis revealing strategic patterns that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension. "They're weaving themselves into the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Every species they encounter, every world they transform, every innovation they share becomes part of a network that strengthens the entire galaxy." The humans had encountered the Caltharians' own ancestors in the distant future, the temporal archaeologists realized. They had shared their knowledge freely, as was their nature, teaching the primitive Caltharians how to manipulate time itself for scientific observation. The technology that now powered the Chronos drift had been a gift from the very species they were currently studying, creating a loop of causality that ensured its own existence. "The database entries we've been using to analyze their development," Hessa said with growing amazement. "The evolutionary models, the civilization development patterns, the technological progression charts, they're all based on partial data from human sources. We've been measuring these humans against standards that they themselves established." Vorth moved to the observation portal and gazed out at the small blue world that had become the center of their universe. The planet continued its ancient orbit around its yellow star, innocent of the cosmic significance it carried, unaware that it had already changed the nature of existence for countless species across the galaxy. "Every challenge that should have destroyed them only made them stronger," he murmured, understanding finally why this world had seemed so determined to support life against impossible odds. "Every extinction event that should have ended their story only taught them new ways to survive." They weren't just evolving randomly. They were preparing themselves for a destiny that required them to be stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than any species that had come before. The temporal observation data showed human influence spreading beyond simple colonization and technology sharing. They were inspiring other species to exceed their own limitations, encouraging cooperation over competition, and gradually transforming the galaxy into something that no single civilization could have achieved alone. "They're creating the conditions for their own past," Kren realized, his scientific mind finally grasping the elegant complexity of what they were witnessing. By improving galactic civilization in their future, they ensure the development of species like us who can observe and document their rise, creating the historical record that guides their own development. The Chronos drift began preparing for its return to the present, its mission complete but its crew forever changed by what they had witnessed. The temporal archaeologists had arrived expecting to document another routine planetary development. Instead, they had discovered the origin point of the species that would eventually teach the galaxy what it meant to reach beyond the boundaries of possibility. "Begin temporal anchor disengagement," Vorth ordered, his voice carrying a reverence that had been absent when they first arrived. "We return to our own time with knowledge that will change how we understand our place in the galaxy." As the ship's systems powered down their observation equipment, the crew took one final look at the third planet of the Terran system. On its surface, early humans were just beginning to look up at the stars with dreams of exploration and discovery. They had no way of knowing that their distant descendants would already be reaching back through time to ensure their success, or that their story would become the foundation upon which galactic civilization itself was built. The Chronos drift departed its temporal observation point and began the journey home, carrying with it the knowledge that humanity wasn't just another species to be catalogued, but the blueprint for what life in the universe could become when it refused to accept limitations. The small blue world faded into the temporal currents behind them, but its influence would ripple forward through time to reshape everything the Caltharians thought they knew about intelligence, determination, and the infinite potential that lay hidden within the most unlikely corners of the cosmos.